If you enjoy the content on this channel, please like and subscribe. The Blackadder is the first series of the BBC sitcom The Blackadder, written by Richard Curtis and Rowan Atkinson, directed by Martin Shardlow. The series, which originally aired on BBC One from the 15th of June 1983 to the 20th of July 1983 and was a joint production with Australian 7 Network, was set in 1485 at the end of the British Middle Ages, with the show being written as a secret history which contends that King Richard III won the Battle of Bosworth Field, only to be unintentionally assassinated by his nephew's son, Edmund, and succeeded by his said nephew, Richard IV, one of the princes in the Tower. The series follows the exploits of Richard IV's favoured second son Edmund, who calls himself the Blackadder. In the show, Blackadder has various attempts to increase his standing with his father, and in the final episode, he even tries to overthrow him. Conceived while Atkinson and Curtis were working on Not the 9 O'Clock News, the series presents medieval issues in Britain in a humorous and often anachronistic manner. Witchcraft, royal succession, European relations, the Crusades, and the conflict between the Crown and the Church. The filming of the series was ambitious, as it featured a large cast and required extensive location shooting. Shakespearean dialogue is sometimes adapted for comic effect. Despite winning an international Emmy, The Blackadder is regarded by its creators and most critics as the weakest Blackadder series. A second series, Blackadder II, aired in 1986. The show would frequently air on Wednesday evenings from 9:25 to 10 o'clock in the evening. Each episode ran roughly 33 minutes. Each of the episodes was based on a medieval theme: the War of the Roses, the Crusades and royal succession, the conflict between the Crown and the Church, arranged marriages between monarchies, the plague, and even witchcraft, and a planned coup d'etat in the final episode. The series was broadcast shortly after the BBC television Shakespeare productions of Shakespeare's 4 plays about the War of the Roses, the 3-part Henry V plays, followed by Richard III, which was first shown on the 23rd of January 1983. Some of the same actors were used to enhance the parody of the Shakespearean history. Ron Cook, who played Richard III in the Shakespearean productions, is cast as the villainous Sean the Irish Bastard. Peter Benson, who played Shakespeare's Henry V, played Henry VI in the first episode. In the series, the character of the Blackadder is somewhat different from later incarnations, being largely unintelligent, naive and snivelling. The character does evolve through the series, however he begins showing signs of what his descendants would be like by the final episode, when he begins insulting everyone around him and making his own plans. This evolution follows naturally from the character's situation. The Blackadder is the title that Edmund adopts during the first episode, after first considering the black vegetable. Presumably one of his descendants adopted the surname before Blackadder II, in which the titled character becomes Edmund Blackadder. Furthermore, Baldric is shown in a more favourable and intelligent light here than in subsequent series. His cunning plans are typically superior to and more workable than Edmund's own. Starting from the second series, the character's relative intelligence and naivety are clearly switched. Atkinson and Richard Curtis developed the idea for the sitcom while working on Not the 9 O'Clock News. Eager to avoid comparisons to the critically acclaimed Fawlty Towers, they proposed an idea of a historical sitcom. In the unaired pilot episode covering the basic plot of Born to be King, Rowan Atkinson speaks, dresses and generally looks and acts like the later Blackadder descendants of the second series onwards, but no reason is given as to why he was instead changed to the snivelling wretch we see in the first series. Richard Curtis has stated he cannot remember the exact reason, but has suggested it was because they wanted to have a more complicated character, implying that the change was driven by the writing, and so they moved away from the swaggering lead from the pilot. Curtis admitted in a 2004 documentary that just before recording began, producer John Lloyd came up to him with Atkinson and asked what Edmund's character was. Curtis then realised that despite writing some funny lines, he had no idea how Rowan Atkinson was supposed to play his part. On the 25th anniversary documentary Blackadder Rides Again, Atkinson added that as the cameras were about to roll for the first time, he suddenly realised he wasn't even sure what voice to use for the character. For the duration of the production, Atkinson endured having his hair trimmed in an unflattering medieval style and wearing a selection of prior-pick codpieces. Atkinson has said about the making of the first series that it was very odd. It was very extravagant. It cost £1 million for 6 programs, which was a lot of money to spend. It looked great, but it wasn't as consistently funny as we would have liked. Much of the location shooting in particular was at Alnwick Castle in Northumberland and the surrounding countryside. Filming would commence in February 1983. Brinkburn Priory, an authentic reconstruction of the medieval monastery church, was used for the episode The Archbishop. The series also used large casts of extras, as well as horses and expensive medieval-style costumes. Filming at the castle was hindered by bad weather. Snow is visible in many of the outdoor location shots. Tony Robertson, who plays Baldrick, said in a 2003 interview he was originally flattered to be offered a part, but it was only later he found that other small part actors had also been offered the role and turned it down. The series guest starred noted actors including Peter Cook, who played Richard III, Miriam Margolyes and Jim Broadbent in the episode The Queen of Spain's Beard, Frank Finlay in Witchsmeller's Perseverant, and Rick Mayall and Patrick Allen, who also narrated the series, in the final episode titled The Black Seal. The title sequence included stock shots of Edmund riding his horse on location, interspersed with shots of him doing silly things. The closing titles were similar to a sequence of Edmund riding, eventually falling off his horse, after which the camera continues following the horse as it goes on running. The series used the first incarnation of the Blackadder theme by Howard Goodall. For the opening theme, a trumpet solo accompanied by an orchestra was used. For the end titles, the theme gained mock heroic lyrics sung by baritone Simon Carrington. As mentioned earlier, the show would go on to win an international Emmy, and the 4 series of Blackadder were voted into second place in the BBC's Britain's Best Sitcom in 2004. Although series advocate John Sargent was not complimentary of the first series, suggesting it was grandiose, confused, and expensive. Members, however, of the cast and crew looking back for the documentary Blackadder Rides Again are also not particularly complimentary of the first series. John Lloyd recalls that a colleague commented at the time, "The series looks like $1 million, but it cost £1 million," although Lloyd did admit that he was proud of the result at the time. Due to the high cost of the first series, the controller at the BBC One, when the second series was commissioned, Michael Grade, was reluctant to authorise a second series without major cost cutting, leaving a gap of 3 years before Blackadder II was broadcast, on condition that it remained largely studio bound. Some fun trivia notes. Blackadder is based on Edmund, the antagonist of William Shakespeare's play King Lear, a scheming, illegitimate son of the king who plots to take the crown for himself. Rowan Atkinson has a stutter, which causes him to struggle with the letter B. He has to visualize the letter before he says it, which is why he puts extra emphasis on words containing the letter, for example, Bob. Later, he created the character of Mr. Bean for this reason. Brian Blessed, Elspeth Gray and Robert East would never return to the series again after the season. Blessed was asked back for one-off appearances in Blackadder III and Blackadder Goes Forth, but was unavailable on both occasions. Brian Blessed and Robert East were cast as father and son, despite only being 7 years apart in age. According to the foretelling, King Richard III was succeeded by his nephew, Richard Duke of York, Harry and Edmund's father, in 1485. In fact, young Richard was only 12 when he and his brother Edward disappeared under suspicious circumstances in 1483, leaving no children of their own. From this, it can be asserted that all of Blackadder canon takes place in an alternate historical timeline. The episode The Foretelling, which aired in Sweden on the 22nd of February 1986, was supposed to have been aired 1 week later on March 1st, but was postponed for a week because most of the airtime of the Swedish television on that day was occupied by the news of the murder of then Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme on the night before. Now, while The Blackadder is most certainly enjoyable, this series lacks the sharpness, wit and character and development that would define the later seasons, and by far and away is the weakest of the 4 seasons. Let me focus though initially on the positives. One of the stand-up performances of the series is Brian Blessed as the over-the-top bombastic Richard IV. Blessed's larger-than-life portrayal brings a lot of energy to the show and his comedic timing is impeccable. It's just a shame he couldn't star in some of the later series. While not as sharp and refined in later seasons, this season still has its moments of brilliance, particularly the memorable The Queen of Spain's Beard episode, where we have a brilliant comedic turn here from Miriam Margolyes and Jim Broadbent, both playing their roles to absolute comic perfection. Look, the writing in this first season is far less sophisticated and much more straightforward. Blackadder himself is less of the cunning, sarcastic mastermind that audiences would become so familiar with from seasons 2 to 4. Instead, here he's a snivelling, naive weakling, relying on the much more sophisticated Baldrick. There's also an uneven tone which fluctuates between the slapstick witty dialogue and the historical absurdity, which can sometimes feel somewhat inconsistent. Look, for me, the writers in this one, Curtis and Atkinson, were really sort of finding their feet as comic writers. The replacement of Ben Elton from Series 2 onwards, though, was just a touch of pure brilliance. While Atkinson is by far and away one of the most brilliant comedians, his writing, for this series anyway, maybe just wasn't where it needed to be, and the partnership between Curtis and Elton really gave Blackadder his synonymous voice. While not the strongest in the series, it still showcases the foundations of what would become one of the best comedy shows of all time. Brian Blessed's performance alongside standard episodes always kept the series entertaining. The writing and character development was still in its infancy. It's clear though the series had potential, which would be fully realised from season 2 onwards. For fans of this series, it's worth watching as a piece of history, but for those new to Blackadder, starting from the second season on may be a more rewarding experience. In saying that though, the Blackadder still will stand the test of time as what would be the foundation and the start to this iconic comedy series. The Blackadder gets an 8.5 out of 10.